Today on the Aussie Wire, we take a look at why it sucks to be right early, but that's the only time when it matters. Then we flirt with the fact checkers as we take a look at a new and tragic kind of forest. We'll show you our first ever special report, a milestone that we are very happy to have achieved here at the Aussie Wire. And finally, we'll chat with Monica Smit to get an update on her court cases, see what she's up to next and find out why, after all that she's been through, she says she'd do it again. All that and more is coming up right now on the Aussie Wire. Peter Costello, the former federal treasurer, is the latest in a growing conga line of high-profile people who are finally coming out and saying what the rest of us knew and said at the time back when it mattered. Here's a few of his remarks in an interview with John Anderson.
John, I'll say to you, I think we went far too far during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
No?
Almost further than any other Western country in terms of expenditures.
I promise you, we will look back on 2020, 2021 in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, and we'll say, wow, we really closed the workplaces? In some states, curfews, you weren't allowed out of your home after 9 o'clock. We didn't have curfews in the Second World War, by the way. The curfews. We had situations where if you walked around the block on your own, you had to have a mask on your own. But there's no way you can infect somebody if you're walking around the block on your own, by the way, right? We had a situation where you were locked in your house 23 hours a day, given 1 hour. 1 hour
It is
to go outside. You look back on it and you say, how did we put up with that infringement of individual liberty?
I must admit to having mixed feelings about Peter Costello and the many other people who were silent when it mattered, now coming out and stating the obvious now that there's no risk. There's nothing left for them to lose. They admit that it was obvious in hindsight, so why didn't they see it at the time, as it happened? Or worse, did they see it, but then choose cowardice over courage? Is their moral compass so weak that they didn't see what was staring them in the face at the time, or is their courage so lacking that they willingly kept their mouth shut whilst watching it unfold right in front of their eyes? Either way, it doesn't seem like a good reflection on them. Forgive me if I seem a little churlish, but as someone who considers 2020 to 2022 to be the darkest years of my life that tested my courage and my mental health more than any other time, and from which I'm still fighting completely insane criminal charges, I can't help but listen to people like Peter Costello in that interview and think, that's nice, but where were you when it mattered? Would have been nice to hear someone like Peter Costello speaking out in our defence when the rubber bullets were still in the air. Maybe you feel the same way, and that's understandable. But I have to be honest with myself and recognise that feeling that way is not helpful. It's not helpful to me, it's not helpful to you, it's not helpful to the cause of truth, freedom and hope. The simple fact is that in every time of change and upheaval, during the rise of every tyranny, great or small, there were those who saw it coming early, there were those who saw it only years later. But in every case, defeating that evil required everyone to work together. The temptation is, and trust me, I feel the temptation, is to lash out at those who come late to our cause. But our focus actually needs to be on those who have not yet come to our cause at all, which means we must welcome those who come to our cause late, even if it is through gritted teeth at times. You may have heard me say in years past, it sucks to be right early, but that's the only time when it matters. It sucked for Ignaz Semmelweis to be right about the importance of hand washing before there was a medical explanation for why it worked. It sucked for Galileo to be right about the solar system's orbit around the sun when the political powers that be in his day had a vested interest in the Earth-centred model. It sucked for those who were right about thalidomide and about asbestos to watch the preventable suffering around them knowing it didn't have to happen. But they didn't have enough support from those around them to stop it from happening. It sucks to be right early, but that is the only time when it matters. Being right when everyone else is already right has very little value. Joining the crowd when the crowd is already right, well, it's the right thing to do, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really change anything or help anyone except perhaps yourself. But being right when the crowd is wrong, and being willing to speak, to be attacked verbally, physically, legally, to stand your ground alone if necessary, against the whole world if that is your fate. Being right early, that's when it matters. Now that doesn't mean that you're automatically right every time you defy the crowd or contradict popular wisdom. Of course not. No one is suggesting that that's the case. Sometimes the crowd is right, and agreeing with them is the right thing. Sometimes the politically hand-picked experts do actually get it right. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. And again, it's right to agree with them at such times. But at a time like that, your agreement or disagreement really doesn't matter. It matters when you're right early. Earlier than the politically compromised experts, earlier than the media, earlier than the crowd. And the sad fact is that when you're right early, you get attacked. And then, when everyone else realizes you were right, they don't come back to apologize or to thank you for paying the price that they made you pay, or for having the courage to speak when they and so many others were cowards. Being right early is a thankless task. To be one of the people who both sees and speaks early, it's thankless, but it is still worth it. Because those same years that are the hardest of my life are also my proudest, and for exactly the same reasons. In this episode of the Aussie Wire News, I'll be interviewing two other people who, like me, were right early. They did very different things in response and paid very different prices, but they were willing to pay whatever price was demanded of them for the hope that by being right early and by speaking up, they would matter. They would make some sort of difference for someone at the very least. And boy, did they. They made a difference, and they mattered, and they continue to matter to this day. I'll say it again. It sucks to be right early. Believe me, I know. But that's the only time when it matters. And as we see more and more people finally coming around to being right, late, just know that you mattered back then more than they do now. Yes, we must welcome them to the cause and be glad for the numbers that we're gaining day by day. But if you were with me and others in being right early, wear it with pride. I have no doubt that it came at a cost for you. I know it did for me. But we mattered. And history will always remember that there were people who were right early and who stood unbending despite all that was done to us by the people who were wrong. History may not remember our names. Who cares if it does? But it will remember that there were people who stood when it mattered. History will remember that we mattered. Let's get on with the news. Well, censorship is, of course, a very, very big topic, something that's very close to our hearts here at the Aussie Wire. We've been fighting the battle online, but there are some people that took their anti-censorship battle offline. And this is a story that I absolutely love. It's the story of the Billboard Battalion. And Wade Northausen joins us right now. Wade, how are you?
G'day, Topher. How you going?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you for coming on the Aussie Wire. You got very creative when you saw that there were people who were being censored and couldn't tell their stories. Tell us a little bit about the birth of the Billboard Battalion.
So what it was about, Topher, was so many people who wanted to say things about what was going on with COVID and the vaccines and the lockdowns and the science, the actual real science behind it. So a lot of people were so frustrated they couldn't get anything online.
Yeah.
If they put anything up, they were censored. We saw doctors, professionals in the field who were censored, and the people were said that they were spreading misinformation. Well, these are the professionals in the field. Yeah. So, we decided to do something different. So we create a Billboard Battalion so that we do convoys and tours and standing educational programs by putting handwritten billboards on our utes and vehicles and taking them into public parks and areas. And that way we can put our message up and the censors can't censor you. And we've found that it is just enormously impactful, and people are so grateful that they can have a platform that they can actually speak properly without being censored.
There's two things that I love about this. It's such an old school solution to a new technology problem. I've got some images here. I'll let this video play while we talk. This is what it looks like. This is called the Forest of the Fallen. We'll get to the crosses in just a second as well, Wade. But I love just such a lo-fi, old school, not technology-based solution to this problem. I absolutely love that. But the other thing that I love, because I saw it myself during the COVID era, I had so many people reaching out to me and to my Topher Field page, crying out for someone just to listen, just for the chance to tell their stories. And no one was listening. They weren't being listened to, and they weren't being taken seriously. And I just found that to be an absolute crime of a situation. And you've found a way to give people a voice here. What's been some of the reactions that you've found, both from the public but also from the people whose stories are on these pieces of paper?
Incredible stories from the people who are vax injured or have passed away after. Such emotional stories, Topher, and explosions of what the hell's the word? They're just trying to express, explosions of expression, because they've been so frustrated, so angry that, their stories, real stories, are being censored, and the general public don't get to see it. And the general public are just walking into what these other people have experienced, and they're getting the rhetoric, the normal rhetoric about how things are safe and effective, and it's all good, and it's going to help stop all this transmission and stop you getting it, when that's just not true. And people have been trying to warn others.
Yeah. Look,
and it's just one story that I'd like to say. When our very first convoy that we did, Topher, was in Echuca, and we had all our vehicles, and I was leading with my ute and all the signage and the lights and so forth. And we were cruising around Echuca, and in that convoy we had a group of nurses, and these nurses had been sacked from the Echuca hospital.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't take the jab. So anyway, they had been trying to speak out and trying to get messages out. So they came on the first convoy, and anyway, we stopped at a park there, and they said, "Can we go back past the hospital again? That'd be good." So we went back past the hospital, and I'm leading the convoy, and we go a bit past the hospital, and I look in the mirror, and the convoy's missing.
Oh no!
There's only myself and Nick, number 1 and 2 vehicle, and I look around and the whole convoy's gone. So I do a bit of a U-ey and go back to see what the hell's going on. And these nurses, they've just decided they're gonna drive into the emergency area of the Echuca Hospital, and the whole convoy just followed them. So can you believe they've pulled up in the emergency area? They've got all their utes and their flags and their lights and whatever, and so then all their ex-workmates are all messaging them from inside, and the connection there was just miraculous.
Yeah, wow.
And once I got control of the situation again and got back where we wanted
out of the emergency, out of everyone's way,
Well, and keep in mind, these are nurses. They understand the situation, and they could vacate the area in 2 seconds, and if necessary, they could actually swing back into action and help if a real serious emergency came in. Which is the irony of the whole situation,
isn't it?
But having said that, at the debriefing later, the barbecue that we had later, and this is a very important part of the message, Topher, is that the amount of relief that these nurses got. In some form of being able to fight back. And that, the thoughts that I had originally about all this, that reinforced it a million times more. So, that's the power of this.
This is such an important message, and this is what the Aussie Wire is all about. We're about truth, freedom, and hope. And hope so often comes from action. Even though your action might be relatively small, we can't all change the situation. We can't undo what's been done. But by taking action in some way, big or small, it changes yourself. It changes your own emotional state and psychology. So I really resonate with that aspect of what you're talking about, Wade. No doubt about that. I do want to put a note here for the fact checkers who are no doubt hovering over this episode with a finger over the button to give us the banhammer, that there is now a class action that's been accepted into court at a federal level against the government. I believe it was a state level, against the government's vaccine mandates from people claiming vaccine injury through the mRNA vaccine. So fact checkers, I suggest that you don't preempt the courts by saying that this is misinformation to suggest that people are being injured. You should probably let the court case run before you get yourself involved and get yourselves into trouble. So maybe just let this information get out there into the public would be what you should have done for the last 2 years, but would certainly be good for you to do from now on. Wade, I look forward to talking to you a lot more as the Billboard Battalion tour is around. You've just sort of launched a new phase, if I understand correctly. You launched it in Albury. That's where this footage comes from that we were just playing a second ago. This is you guys in Albury just a few days ago. Tell me about the large crosses. This is an evolution of what you've been doing.
Yes, absolutely, Topher. So we've traditionally done our billboard messaging, and this is an extension of that, is to start to highlight the issue of deaths and injuries that are connected to certain things that we're talking about. And what we want to do is, a lot of people have said, look, in our groups, we know about this sort of stuff. And the whole purpose of this now is to take this into full-blown public arena, because we want to get this message to the general public, who many of the people have pulled up and said, look, I've never heard of any of this stuff.
So many.
I've never heard of this. So this is a campaign to take these issues into the very heart of the public, so they can then become educated and see the realities of what's happened. And then they also can be aware of, don't get any more of this stuff. And we're putting up real stories with real people who have been really affected. And this thing stretches out its tentacles, wrap around everybody and squash everybody. So, this is a part of what we're doing, and this will be the first one, Topher. And we have counted this to be incredibly successful, because this was on the very edge of the Hume Freeway in just North Albury on the Victoria-New South Wales border. This is the biggest major road in Australia. And the reactions from people tooting the horn and the truckies going past, blowing the horn, has been amazing. So, we intend to expand this now and take it as far as we can.
Now, of course, the Forest of the Fallen there it's kind of a separate thing, but the same thing as what you're doing now with the crosses. We've seen a couple of media hit jobs on the Forest of the Fallen. One that stood out to me at the time was where they blew up this story about someone who had to reassure his friends that he was actually alive after people saw him in the Forest of the Fallen and thought that he must have died. Misunderstanding, of course, that there are stories there from people who have passed away, and also stories from people who have had adverse reactions, or what are believed to be adverse reactions, and misunderstanding the purpose of that. My point here is the media did this hit piece trying to suggest that there was misinformation in the Forest of the Fallen, that this person had to say, no, really, I'm alive. If you read deeper into the story, he did have an adverse reaction and acknowledged that it probably was the vaccine. But the media didn't tell you that side of it. They tried to just say, this whole thing is just, they're wrong, and we can prove that they're wrong because this person had to tell their friends that they weren't dead. Well, the Forest of the Fallen never said they were. So there's a lot of media games that go on around this issue, but I do feel like it's breaking open. And the Forest of the Fallen and the Billboard Battalion and Wade and all of your team, you've been on the leading edge of this in Australia, resorting to analogue means to get this message out despite the censorship. Well, that censorship is falling away now. The gig is up, and it's getting harder and harder for them to maintain the narrative that these things are safe and effective, and that's a good thing. But I want to applaud you and thank you for your work right from the very, very beginning in helping to get that word out despite the censorship. So, Wade, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
You're very welcome, Topher, and same to you, mate. I know you've been at the coalface of the battle line, so to speak, as have many people. So, the message here is we need to stick together. We need to fight together, And that's what we're seeing unfolding, because these are critical times, absolutely critical times. We haven't seen the last of this. So, very much appreciate the opportunity to come on your show, particularly being so new and that Topher as well. So, well done to you, mate. This is another chapter or another platform as well that's in the business of helping to save lives.
That was Wade Northausen from the Billboard Battalion. You can find out more about what they're doing and where they're going to be, so you can support them at billboardbattalion.com. I drink a brew coffee every morning because it's great coffee made easy. Brew is organic, specialty grade coffee that is roasted, ground and sealed in individual servings right here in Australia. Perfect for the work site, for the campsite, for travellers on the flight deck or at home on the back deck. Brew. It's great coffee made easy. BrewAustralia.com. Use the code TAW10 for a 10% discount every time you buy. Here at the Aussie Wire News, we are proud to present you with our first ever special report. This one's been prepared by our Sydney correspondent, Bruyne, and it's something he should rightly be proud of. I think it's a truly fantastic production that he's put together for us. And so, with thanks to Bruyne, or Chris Coveries if you're looking for him online, please enjoy the very first ever Aussie Wire special report.
The Liddell plant in New South Wales is set to close this week.
The closure of Liddell has been...
It will be switched off tomorrow, the end of an era for the coal fire.
Liddell has well and truly come to the end of its lifespan.
So it was always going to happen. But what we're saying is that it's sad, but it's inevitable.
Two chimneys, each 550 feet high, mark the Liddell power station 170 miles north of Sydney.
The year is 1975, and the Liddell power plant is providing 40% of New South Wales' electricity. Judged so efficient, not even the latest nuclear power stations could compete in terms of costs with the efficient coalfields power stations. And as the New South Wales economy grew, new generators came to fuel it. Vales Point in 1978, Eraring in 1982, Bayswater in 1986, and Mount Piper in 1993, providing electricity at affordable prices for businesses and households. $50, $30, even $10 a meg or megawatt hour. Lou Amato was the Parliamentary Secretary for Small Business and served 8 years in the New South Wales Upper House for the Liberal Party.
I remember, if I go back in history, I believe it was the Labor Premier, I think it was around about 1948, who brought back the electricity back to the people. And by doing so, what that did, that provided cheap electricity, not only for the citizens of New South Wales, but particularly for manufacturing.
What do you think of the closure of Liddell?
I think they should have had much better plans in place. Like renewable energy, yes, the concept is great, but unfortunately, it's not reliable.
As AGL says, it's going to reduce our carbon emissions.
Look, in my opinion, when we're selling our resources to other countries that are using those resources to generate electricity, and they're the ones actually emitting carbon, what the carbon Australia emits is nothing. On the world stage, it represents nothing. But to the cost to our citizens and to our mum and dads out there and to our business communities and our manufacturing, it's a huge, huge cost.
But in 2008, everything changed.
The global financial crisis is affecting financial markets right around the world.
Another reassurance today that the Australian economy has fared better than most during the global financial crisis.
But young professional men were also the biggest victims of the global financial crisis.
Energy generation in Australia peaked in July 2008, and despite 4 million more people in Australian homes, it has never returned. Rising electricity costs simply made it too expensive for manufacturing in Australia.
Today we're announcing that Holden will cease manufacturing in Australia.
Far more economically viable for the business to pay them to stand and do basically nothing compared to what they normally do, because the price of electricity would mean that we were actually selling at a loss.
They either shut down or moved to China. Then Labor sold the retailers and some of the generators.
The New South Wales government's fire sale of the state's electricity assets,
and the Liberal Party sold the rest of the generators, even the poles and wires. Here's the Premier at the time, Mike Baird.
Here are the real facts about poles and wires. We're not selling any assets. We're only leasing 49%.
Premier Baird later stepped down in January 2017 to spend more time with the family. 4 weeks later, Mike Baird accepted a senior executive role at National Australia Bank with a $2.29 million a year salary. And with both parties' teamwork, Australia's electricity supply became a free market. Liddell was sold to a private company, AGL, for an effective price of $0. So now, when we get up in the morning, and as the sun sets, prices rise. And when the sun is at its highest, 12,000 megawatts of solar oversupplies the market, sending prices negative every day. And between the two, city energy traders buy, sell, and speculate on the pricing. For 10 years, the price of electricity slowly rose from $30 to $50 a meg, to an average of $100 and then $150. But winter 2022, that market went out of control.
Blackout danger zones as our power crisis...
The national energy body stepping in and suspending the market.
Staggering information confronting reality about our energy crisis.
Wholesale prices, normally $30 to $300 a meg, reached $5,000 to even $15,000. The total energy market, normally valued at $5 million for a half-hour block, became an almost $500 million casino every 30 minutes. But this entire episode was not unprecedented. In fact, the entire episode had played out just the same 20 years ago when in 1998 California turned their electricity over to the free market and deregulated it. Just what a fraudulent and highly profitable multi-billion-dollar energy corporation needed. Enron.
For weeks before a quarterly report, we would be under the impression that we weren't going to make our numbers. But then somehow, miraculously, we always made the numbers and then some. And his answer was one word: California.
1,000 miles of California power lines, enough to circle the earth. But for the second day in a row, not enough electricity for America's largest state and the world's sixth largest economy.
And I remember the conversation I'd had with Ken. At the end of it, he says, "Well, Dave, old buddy, let me just tell you, it doesn't matter really to us what kooky rules you Californians put in place. I got a bunch of really smart people down there who figure out how to make money anyhow."
Entire suburbs of Sydney were plunged into darkness when the power went out.
First thing we heard about this energy crisis is where our lights are going to go off in the middle of winter when we're using half the electricity.
Just 2 weeks into winter,
households are being asked to, to turn off appliances if you can to preserve and conserve power.
Last night they issued what's known as a lack of reserve notice, which is a fancy way of saying demand is up.
Wholesale electricity prices along the East Coast have soared this year.
High prices are when it gets in the 50s.
For less than $100 per megawatt hour to more than $700.
$1,000?
Prices aren't going to stay at $1,000 forever.
Energy corporations found that it was more profitable to speculate than generate.
Ultimately, the system's failed. We've never seen prices this high in the history of the market. You could arguably say competition in the energy market is now officially dead. I wake up this morning and the average cost for my customers' energy yesterday was 80 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm charging them 16.
They arbitrage the California market to the tune of $1 million or $2 a day.
The heart of it is that an industry that went for 100 years, from the days of Edison, built the best electrical system in the world, was all of a sudden turned into a casino.
And when that wasn't enough, Enron traders colluded with the generator operators they owned to shut the power plants down.
Hey, this is David up at Enron. There's not much demand for power at all, and if we shut it down, could you bring it back up in 3 or 4 hours?
Oh yeah. Can't turn these people loose and let them just have a, quote, free market, because a free market is goddamn expensive to the customers.
Expensive electricity. Anything when it goes into a private sector, although it's good in some ways, Chris, this is what I'm talking to you about. The principle of it's great, yeah, but anything that goes private ultimately comes at a cost.
Stuart Bonds is a coal miner and independent political candidate. At the 2019 federal election, he came within just 1,000 votes of winning.
It is a big thing to lose a power station that provides hundreds of jobs, but they will be absorbed in the area. But to your question, that it is going to be a significant impact to the whole state, right? Because you're taking reliable 24/7 electricity out of the grid. You get in the city and you become disconnected from everything. You become disconnected from where your power is generated. You become disconnected from where your food is generated. You become disconnected from where the minerals that provide you with the lifestyle that you have are mined and where they come from. We're pulling 5.5 million homes worth of electricity out of the grid, whilst we are adding hundreds of thousands of people. Now, once you break a system like this, that's it. You can't just flick a switch and rebuild it. We are playing with something, and our politicians are playing with something that they fundamentally do not understand. And people are sleepwalking into an absolute disaster.
Despite all of this, right? Despite all of this, despite what you've brought up, these details, and as much as they do matter, it's socially inevitable, economically inevitable, and most importantly, isn't this just politically inevitable?
But what is...
That special report was brought to you by Krista Bruyne. If you got some value out of that, then make sure you let us know in the comments. We'll use your comments and encouragements to twist his arm and get him to create some more special reports in future. It goes without saying, of course, that we can't cover a topic as big as the energy grid in one segment, so we will be continuing our coverage of the topic of energy going forward. And when it comes to the so-called privatisation of the energy grid that we heard a lot about in that segment, well, I think there's a lot more than meets the eye. You may recall last week I chatted with Joanne Nova and touched on the issue of the Australian energy market operator and the so-called pricing stack. We'll be taking a deep dive into that next month on the Aussie Wire News because, personally, I'm of the view that the privatisation of the energy sector was a sham and is now being used as a popular scapegoat to deflect blame from where it really lies. But that's a topic for another time. For now, here's more of the news. Well, hard times bring out the best in people, and one of the amazing things that has happened over the last few years as some people have faced some very hard times is we've seen some really remarkable people stepping up and getting active in some really remarkable ways. We heard about the Billboard Battalion earlier in this episode. Well, now I want to bring you up to speed with a story that most of you have heard of in some capacity at some point in time. I want to bring you up to date with what's going on with the one and only Monica Smit. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me on. And congratulations on the new show.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, we, of course, had a bit to do with each other. We were both involved in what I call the battleground Melbourne era. You were incredible in standing firm against phenomenal pressure that you and Nick Patterson, I believe, were the only two people that spent extended stints in prison. In your case, it was purely because you stood your ground against the bail conditions that they, completely unjust bail conditions that they brought against you. Just in case there's anyone watching that doesn't know that story, what's sort of the Cliff Notes version of what happened to you, and where are things at with all of that now?
So pretty much I was arrested for incitement because I promoted a protest during lockdown. That is it. The bail conditions were so onerous, I wouldn't have even been able to speak against the COVID restrictions in the privacy of my own home, along with curfews from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. And note that I am still on bail to this day. So I could not, in good faith, sign those bail conditions. That's why I went to prison. And then in the Supreme Court, they were all those onerous bail conditions were taken away. Then 6 months later, the police took out a warrant to force me to give them password access to everything on the phones that they still have in their custody, by the way. So Google Docs, Google Drive, Google Maps, all that sort of stuff. It was a massive intimidation tactic. I said no to those. I said no to that warrant. No worries, I'll go back to prison if I have to. I'm not giving up my entire database.
Can I stop you there? You say no worries, I'll go back to prison if I have to. How many days had you already spent in prison and how many in solitary confinement?
22 days in solitary confinement the whole time.
I mean, you say that like it's just such a simple, no worries, I'll go back to prison. That was an incredible moment. For the second time around, you stood your ground against the sorts of intimidation that most Australians would never believe even happens in Australia.
Well, I will say I am in a very unique position as well. I have no children and I have a very supportive family. During COVID, I never lost any friends, any family. I didn't lose a job. So I was in a unique position. I was the right person for it, and I was blessed to be in that position, and I'd do it again. That is why I took such a strong stand, because I could mentally, physically, emotionally, and things like that. I couldn't have withstood some of the things that you went through, Topher, in your own personal life, and some of the things that a lot of other people went through. So I just think I was in a unique position. But yes, in some respect, of course, it was courageous, but I was really happy to do it. But a week after I said no to giving them my passwords, they withdrew the charges. So it was just a tactic, really. But yes, as you alluded to, I have a court case in 4 days, on Monday. And these are just 2 COVID fines, but they are attached to the same charge sheet. So it's actually really pivotal for me, because I will get off bail for the first time in a year and a half. So even though it's just 2 COVID fines, it's really important to me.
This is something that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge. They want to pretend like COVID is some piece of ancient history, like all of these Dan Andrews press conferences and all of the protests and all of the craziness. This, by the way, we're watching footage from the documentary Battleground Melbourne, which, Monica, you were very, very kind to be in. And you can watch that in full for free at battlegroundmelbourne.com. A lot of people want to put this into the ancient past, but there are an enormous number of people, some of whom we've already interviewed here on the Aussie Wire. Myself, personally, I'm still up on criminal charges for incitement. I believe I'm the last one that they're still pursuing for incitement. You've managed to, in some senses, get off those charges, but the reason they dropped those charges was because you'd already spent a month in prison. You'd already done your time and then some. And so the impact of what's been done is very much ongoing and lingering. But for you, sorry, yeah?
Well, I'll say that, I put on a brave face all the time because I feel like I have to. But it's been extremely traumatic for me in my life. And when these charges are over, I'm obviously going to have to go after them, because justice must be had. And when I'm going after them, they can't withdraw.
That's right.
I'm going to be the one in charge. And I have to do that for the people. So the point is, this is going to be a 5-year-long process. And just keep in mind, it was all because I had an audience and I put a poster online. Now, my one question to the audience would be, Topher, that if we are in a communist society, then at least tell us. Tell us so that we know what we're dealing with. But don't pretend to be in a democracy and put someone like me, a tax-paying citizen, into this situation for 5 years. Don't pretend. Just tell me, and then you can put whoever you want in prison, and then we'll know what's going on.
Truth.
But this is...
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right, and there is an awful lot of trauma out there, myself included. I've had to work through a lot over the last couple of years, still working through a lot. Someone like yourself, it's very, very real. Many others, that's the case as well. But you're not taking it lying down. You've just said that to us. You're going to be fighting back, but you are a part of what is almost like a global movement that's begun happening now. Tell us a bit more about that.
So We Are Ready was meant to be a once-off event, from what I understand. It's all based around the Bilderberg Club, which they're meeting in Lisbon, Portugal on that weekend on the 20th of May. And so some bright spark thought, why don't we make a global event around it to tell the globalists in a subliminal way that we are ready. Like, hurry up, we're done with it, bring it on. We're not scared anymore. And I feel like this sort of messaging is actually more powerful than you could imagine. And if it can resonate throughout the world, it's going to dissipate a lot of fear and start people preparing instead of being scared. So that's where it all started, is the Lisbon event. And then it's just grown from there. And to be honest, I think it's shocked everyone. It's probably going to end up being about 170 events globally. And I will just say that the event is very varied. There's an event in Canada where you have to hike for an hour and a half to get there. Some of the event, it's awesome. Some of the events are in a bunker. Some of the events you have to email someone to get the address. So they're extremely varied. Some are rallies, but the organizers of the event, they're brandless and faceless for a reason, to promote unity, and they're encouraging people to collect email addresses on the day, because I think, a big rally is amazing in itself, but if you can somehow collect email addresses and stay connected, now that is powerful. A group of 3 people can change the world. One can, but 3 is going to be easier. So that's the whole focus around it. It's about the attitude and the messaging, and it's also about connecting people to stay connected, not just a once-off rally.
Well, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's been said that a tireless minority is all it takes to change the world, and in fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And so the key for us is to be tireless. We know we're a minority. That's a given at the moment. We are getting bigger every day, though, but we have to be tireless and we have to keep pushing on. Monica, I have enormous respect for all that you've done in the past, all that you're continuing to do. If people want to find out more about yourself, what you're doing, and also these We Are Ready events, where would they go?
Well, We Are Ready is just weareready.world, and I run Reignite Democracy Australia and Reignite Freedom. And soon I will have a website, monicasmit.com, so that everything I do is in one place, because it's kind of fragmented. I'm really a part of a lot of different things. We also have a campaign called accessdeathstats.com, which are bringing together the access mortality around the world into one page. So there's a lot of things going on. So if you follow any of those, Monica Smit, on any of social media or whatever, you will get all my stuff.
It sounds like we're going to have another chat here on the Aussie Wire about that accessdeaths.org. But Monica, more power to you. Thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire. I wish you all the very best with your court case coming up next week, and also with everything that you do beyond that point.
Thanks, Topher. I appreciate it, and good luck.
Can you believe that the Aussie Wire news is only 2 weeks old? I can't speak for you, but for me, it feels like I've been doing this all my life. I'm having a great time bringing you the news, and based on your feedback, it seems like you're loving it as well. But we are only new, and that means we need help. We need help to reach new people, which you can help with by liking, subscribing, and sharing, spreading the word for us. And we need insiders, people who financially support the Aussie Wire and benefit from our giveaways, our insiders community, and our discounts on event tickets as we go forward. You can become an Aussie Wire insider by visiting theaussiewire.locals.com/support. The link is, of course, in the description. If you need to catch up on past episodes of the Aussie Wire news, then go to theaussiewire.com. And to follow our guests or to find out more information on what we've discussed, check the show notes below for links. That's all for today. I'm Topher Field, and I'll see you next time on the Aussie Wire News.